Okay, so going on, I would like to introduce our final speaker of the day. He is one of the founders of Candidate Select, like Dr. Jan Bergerhoff, and is also a research fellow at the School of Business and Economics at Maastricht University. His name is Dr. Philipp Karl Seegers. He is also involved and he leads the FAIR project, which seeks to develop non-discriminatory algorithms in recruiting. So today he's going to be giving a presentation on the acceptance of algorithms in personnel selection. So if you're happy to take it from there, then I will turn it over to you, Philip.
Yes, thank you, Josh, for the kind introduction. I look very symmetric to what Jan is doing, but I'll be giving a very, very different presentation, that much I can assure. I'll be talking about a research project that we're currently involved in with the University of Cologne, and this is called the FAIR project. When I say we, I mean CASE, Candidate Select, our startup company. And we are working together with the chair of Professor Pinger at the University of Cologne, and we also have some associate partners in that project. One is Deutsche Telekom. We have Simon Kucher or Simon Kutscher, which is a very well-known German consultancy. We have FIGA, probably not so well-known. They sit in the Sauerland area of Germany and they produce pipes. So sort of typical German hidden champion. And we have StudiTemps, and StudiTemps is a company that offers personnel solutions for students. So essentially they do flex work, temp work with students as part-time jobs next to their study mostly. The project is supported by our German state here in the region. So that's the largest German state of North Rhine-Westphalia, and by the European Commission. FAIR is short for Fair Artificial Intelligence Recruiting. So the aim of this project is to develop non-discriminatory recruiting algorithms. So there's two aspects to it that are in that sense new. It's the idea that we develop recruiting algorithms, and of course there are some already, but I think we can do more and we can do better. And we also need to make sure that these algorithms are non-discriminatory, because otherwise, if they just reproduce what we're already doing, I don't think it's going to work out. So we really have to try and beat the status quo. And this is what we're doing. But this is not where I want to start. Where I want to start is what motivated us. And that is, even it doesn't really matter whether we like it or not. It's the fact that HR discriminates in recruiting. There's much research on this. It hasn't changed to a way that we can't measure it anymore in research. So there's much literature. There's some sources here on my slide, but there's so many more. We had a talk on this by a researcher from the Institute of the Labor Market in Bonn, IZA, who's doing research on this, Dr. Ulf Rinne. It's quite shocking that people who belong to certain groups are discriminated just because they belong to those groups. So by origin, by race, by gender, by sexuality, all these discriminations exist out there, and HR is doing them. If we ask the question why they are happening, I don't think of course there are some people, but in general terms, I think that most people, the huge majority of people in HR are not discriminating intentionally. So it's not that they decide that they don't want to hire these groups, but it's more unintentional. So there's lots of biases in humans that lead us to make biased decisions. So and there's information asymmetry. So if you think about what Jan presented early on, where he talked so much about Indian degrees and how they're different and why it is hard to read them, but why some of them are super competitive, whereas others are not. This is a clear information asymmetry. If you get an application from someone from a university that you know, maybe even one of the very good universities that they are in the UK, and you get an application from someone from India, then it doesn't matter whether the acceptance rate for this specific Indian college is even lower than the one at Oxford. You won't notice, and these kind of information asymmetries, they lead to unintended discrimination, and this is what's happening. So we need to find solutions to deal with that, because sort of linking to the first talk we got today, this is costing money. I mean, we can think in business terms. I mean, I don't want to give a moral or ethical debate on this. I'm not an expert on that anyhow. Of course, that's important, but we don't need that to motivate getting rid of discrimination, because this is a business decision. This is costing money. We are needlessly reducing the pool of feasible applicants if we discriminate against certain groups by not considering them. And that costs money because we're not getting the best employees. So what is the FAIR project doing? We're trying to work on this. We're trying to improve on this. And we're doing that for the very early stages of screening, because that's also something that research indicates. Discrimination is larger in the early phases of the screening process, the recruitment process, because you have less information. So once you get to an interview, you meet someone, you get so much more information on top of the things that you can immediately see. So on top of gender or race, you get more information. You talk to people, you sense whether you like them or not. And then in these later stages, discrimination is usually less of a problem. I mean, if people want to discriminate, then this is the ideal moment for them to do it. But normally people don't want to discriminate, as I said. So discrimination normally takes place in the early stages. And the earliest stage is normally a CV screening process. And on the CV, we have specific types of information, but information is generally limited because we can't talk to the person. There's no feedback. We just look at this piece of paper. And the aim of the FAIR project is to make information that is on the CV readable and analyzable for algorithms. So when we talk about education, which is certainly a big part on it, then I think we have very good tools already in place here at CASE. So we're able to screen higher education degrees. In Germany, we're also able to screen a couple more educational degrees. We're doing that for, but with the higher education degrees, we're doing that for the UK. We're doing that for Spain, Portugal, for Italy, and we're heavily working on the US and on India and on other European countries to cover as much as possible from this education part, because I don't think it's the only information, but I think it's an important information. And Jan already explained that it's a long-term indicator. It's very robust, especially when you compare it to assessment tests that then have other advantages, because they are more comparable, because everyone is taking exactly the same test. But I think we've shown that using statistical tools, that is a problem that can be overcome. And that the screening, the scoring we do of education, it serves as a very good predictor of the important variables that follow later on. I think that also links nicely to the other things we heard today. So what we're also working on in the FAIR project is work experience. How can we score that? And there are many questions associated to that. And I'm not going to focus on that because that is also a talk for itself. We're going to be looking at social activities. I think this is super interesting because I don't have a clear intuition in which way this will go. Morally, I mean, we all want these things to be important and these things to matter. But from a research perspective and also from a business perspective, we need to look at them and see whether people who are involved in social activities, whether there's really a selection effect in terms of that this tells us something about their personality that also makes them better employees. We have to see. And then there's skills that we want to look at, language skills, IT skills. So these are all the information that are on a CV. And we are developing algorithms within the FAIR project that are able to understand these things. And I'm not going to talk a lot about machine learning and the tools here today, because this is not the talk. The talk is about whether people actually accept this, whether the acceptance of algorithms is high if we look at students and graduates. But the way we're going to be doing this, just this short sentence, is we need lots of contextual information, because HR has small training data sets. I mean, it's a lot of effort to get 1 point in your training data set, because that means you have to hire someone and keep them for years in order to get good training data. So the training data sets in our HR applications, recruiting applications, are much smaller than they are, for example, if you think about Amazon, Netflix, these typical big data AI companies where they try to tell you what's the best movie to watch next. I mean, they have huge data sets because everyone is watching so many movies every day. That's not the case here. So we need more efficient models, and the typical AI models are very inefficient from a statistical perspective. I mean, they're very powerful, but they need a lot of data. That's what inefficient means. And then the other part of the FAIR project, as important as the algorithms themselves, is our index called the FAIR Index. And the FAIR Index is there to monitor whether there's discrimination in the recruitment process. So we said we're not just going to be developing a recruiting algorithm, but we're going to be developing non-discriminatory recruiting algorithms. So we need a metric to show that, and we talked about the FAIR Index and how it's set up in the past. So if someone wants to look that up, it's online. If you don't find it, send me an email or Josh, and we're happy to point you to it. But the idea of this FAIR Index is that we use a neutral criterion and see whether people deviate from that neutral criterion. And deviations are perfectly fine, but if we see that deviations go to the disadvantage of certain groups, then this is what we would call discrimination. So it's fine if you have an objective criterion, for example, like a test, a good, validated, neutral test, and then it's fine to deviate from what the test says, because the test is narrow. This is not everything that you might want to consider. Maybe you have other information you want to consider. But because this test is neutral, if you deviate from this test always to the advantage of men, for example, to the disadvantage of women, then this is probably discrimination. So this is how we can measure this, and this works for algorithms and for humans. This is just a way to see whether the decisions that are taken, irrespective, it doesn't matter who takes them, whether these decisions are free of discrimination or not. Okay, that's a short introduction. The important question for today is, and I'm just going to be very brief on that, is do recruiters accept algorithms? Do they think that this is something they will need to work with in the future? And well, yeah, there's some training to do, and I also think that we as a company that offers these algorithms, that we should be involved in also explaining and training and being transparent, because otherwise there's no learning. So we're always very open to explain what our algorithms are doing. So 81% of the recruiters think that AI will be crucial in the future. The majority has limited knowledge, but this is something we need to be working on. And we find that in different sources. But if we think about the acceptance of the people who are being selected, screened, hired in the end, then this is also a relevant question, because transparency dictates it in a way that you should be open with these kind of things. Because if you use algorithms and never talk about it, then this sort of just adds to the myth that algorithms are super scary and that no one should be involved with them. So there's some studies on acceptance, and one of these studies, and I think it's a very interesting one, finds that a quarter of the applicants would like to be screened by algorithms, and then women are more likely to have a positive opinion of algorithms. And that's a bit surprising, because generally in the literature, whenever it comes to topics, very broadly speaking, but I can find concrete examples for this to back this statement up. That, for example, when it comes to digitization, women are less enthusiastic than men. This is something that we also had a look at in the past. So, okay, we have the statement here, and this could be because women made the experience that they are discriminated more frequently than men. So maybe they think that algorithms might be a tool to make the entire process more objective, and hence they like them. Before I get into the acceptance, so we have some real data. We sampled more than 15,000 students to get a good impression of the acceptance of algorithms. Before I get there, I have to add a little disclaimer. So in this research, when it's about acceptance, we just talk about algorithms, but that's not the case. That's a huge simplification. So just as with any HR diagnostic test, there are good and bad algorithms. And there's not just the algorithms, just as there's not the cognitive test or the personality test. And some of them are great and some of them are bad. And in order to see whether they're good or bad, you have to get the data, you have to look at it, you have to collect your metrics. So, and the metrics for algorithms are not very different than those for psychological tests. So the algorithm, the psychological test should be objective. This is easier for algorithms because, well, they are not dependent on the environment that they're collected in, the situation. They should be reliable, so they should get the same results whenever you do it twice. Also easy for algorithms, but, and this is super important for algorithms, they should be externally valid. Externally valid means that they can predict the things that matter thereafter. So if you use an algorithm in order to screen applicants, it should be related to the later job performance. Otherwise, it's not a good idea to use it. So if the algorithm is just giving random results, then you can also roll a dice. And if it's discriminating, then it's also probably not a good idea, but this is a different story. So validity is one side of the aspect, is one side of the story. The other side of the story is that we should have an algorithm that does not discriminate. And these things tend to go together because, as I said in the beginning, normally there's no difference in productivity between men and women. So if you always select men over women, then also your algorithm is not going to have a great external validity because it's not going to be making the perfect hiring decisions. Okay, what is the data I'm going to show you today? I'm going to be talking about the Fachkraft study. This is a long-running student survey that we started in 2012 when Jan and I were still in my PhD at Maastricht University. Well, I was at Maastricht University, Jan was at Bonn University. To give you the exactly right facts, and then we started with this in 2012. We do it twice a year. So in Germany, we have semesters. So there's 2 breaks for exams every year. And within those breaks, before the new semester starts, we conduct a new survey. Per round, we have roughly 20,000 participants. You can see it in the chart. And we collected 16 rounds so far. So we sampled more than 300,000 students. And in that data, we have also IQ tests, we have personality tests, and it's a very rich data set also to do research, but it's also very valuable for us as a company. And so we cooperate with lots of universities. In this case, the Fachkraft study is run through Maastricht University and us, and we don't see any systemic deviations, systematic deviations from the German student population. So the data is fairly representative. I'm always very careful with the term representative because it's sort of a statistical concept that you can never reach. I mean, it's the idea to have a perfect random sample, but in practice, we can only try to get as close to that as possible. But the distribution of observable characteristics like field of study, like the state they are studying and so on and so forth, they are very close to the population characteristics. So it's really good data to do research with. And we asked the question, do you like algorithms, essentially? And we had 2 different ways of asking that same question, and I'm going to show that in a second. And then I'm also going to show you whether there's a heterogeneity between the different groups. So, for example, by gender, as was raised by the statement we had early on, that women might accept algorithms more than men, which I think is very interesting. And then we're also going to be asking people what they prefer, so whether they prefer algorithms or humans or maybe a combination. But if we ask about the general acceptance, so if they think that algorithms should be generally used in recruiting, we get a negative majority. So the majority of people says no or rather no, whereas only a bit more than 40% says yes or rather yes. So Germans are algorithm skeptic. That's one thing we can learn here. And I do think that this is representative of the German student population, and it's interesting for other countries, but I do think that sort of the deviations between groups. But I want to point out that Germans are, whenever it comes to data privacy, algorithms, transparency of these kind of things, that Germans are typically more skeptical than other nationalities. But yeah, especially when we look at the general acceptance, so whether algorithms should be used everywhere, they're rather negative about it. But this changes, and this is, I think, the interesting thing about it that can also be used for other countries, for other contexts, is that once you explain why you're using them and you sort of tell them, this is the criterion I'm trying to improve on, this is why I'm doing it. So, for example, I want to reduce discrimination. I want to avoid making mistakes. I want to increase the transparency of decisions. I mean, they don't buy that so much, but we're going to get into it. And I want to increase the speed. I want to give faster feedback to an application. Then people switch. So now we have a pro-algorithm majority suddenly. And And well, this is largest if we think about rapid feedback. I mean, of course, people understand that algorithms can work faster and can work 24/7, other than HR employees. So yes, of course, they are quicker. But also, if we look at reducing discrimination, we get more than 60% of the people saying that they prefer a process that includes algorithm over one that does not include algorithms. So only 30 something percent say they only want humans, whereas the others say, well, we want algorithms, that's the green bar, or we want algorithms in combination with humans. And I think that's a very good application scenario. But we're going to be talking more about this. So what did I just say? Well, if we ask generally, do you want algorithms to be involved in recruitment? Then we have a majority against algorithms. But as soon as we explain why we were using them, as soon as we sort of explain the aims, the goals of employing algorithms, and it's not just I want to lower costs and I want to make my process more efficient, but it's sort of, hey, I want to decrease discrimination. This is an important factor. Humans are biased, and we didn't explain it in that detail because that would prime our participants, but to give context here, then we see suddenly we have a majority for it. And that majority for it is even larger than the majority against it we had previously. So we almost get 70% over those 4 criterion. So this is the average over the 4 criterion. We almost get 70% in favor of algorithms because we told them why they should be used. And we also left them the chance to say, I like algorithms, but I want here the interaction between the human and the machine that works well. So how does it look if we compare different groups to each other? So is the acceptance different for different groups? First, by gender. I quoted this earlier study, and I'm going to have a chat with the professor who's in charge of it, I think in 2 weeks or so, and so just to find out where the differences are coming from, because we don't find that. We don't find that females prefer algorithms. In the question where we ask generally, the difference is even quite large. So in general terms, females are more against algorithm than men. As soon as we start with the concrete criteria, this difference shrinks. It's still visible. So the bars for human are larger with female. The combinations also are larger for female, but only the algorithm is a bit smaller. So there's still a tiny difference between men and women once we explain the usage, but then it almost vanished. So also here, in general terms, females are more skeptical, but as soon as you explain it, for example, I want to lower discrimination. This is why I want to use an objective and neutral algorithm, which is per se not necessarily an easy, depends on the training data and so forth, but this is not the talk about how to set up algorithms. So yes, algorithms can discriminate, but there are also ways to try to monitor that and make sure they don't. And I personally think it's easier to monitor the discrimination of an algorithm than the discrimination of a human HR department. But again, that's in my opinion. But we see that the differences between gender vanish as soon as we explain why we're employing algorithms. So if we think about race or origin, we can contrast Germans to non-Germans, and this already explains what I said at the beginning. Germans are very algorithm skeptic, and I think there's 2 components here. There's sort of the general German skepticism about technology and data privacy and these kind of things. But this could also be related, and this is hard to tell from, I mean, this gets anecdotal, and I'm not trying to explain and motivate the results. It could also be related to experiences of discrimination in the past. So, of course, Germans in Germany are subject to no discrimination, or virtually no discrimination, at least not because of them being German. Maybe they have other characteristics, whereas non-Germans may have made experiences of discrimination in the past. So here we find, even for the general application of algorithms in HR, we find a majority among non-Germans. And as soon as we explain them why we're doing it, as soon as we get down to these concrete criteria, again, the differences vanish, but they're still there. So there's still there's a German majority for algorithms, but there's also still an even larger non-German majority for these recruitment algorithms. Final group difference I want to tell you is the difference between STEM and non-STEM. So STEM is people working in the technical sciences, natural sciences, engineering, computer science, mathematics, these kind of things. So you could make an argument that maybe they better understand how algorithms work. I hope that they do that, because otherwise we'd be having problems. But you could also make an argument that because they know how they work, maybe they like them more, or general because they're enthusiastic about technology. Maybe they also it's easier for them to welcome this new technology, and this is also what we find. So for the generally asked question, again, even for STEM, let me see, is that the right way? I think, I'm not 100% sure whether the labels are correct, because the generally asked, no, the labels are reversed. I'm super sorry. I'll correct that when we send out the slides afterwards. So there is a small majority against the general application of algorithms among STEM students, and the majority should be larger among non-STEM students. And this is not what we see here. So the labels STEM and non-STEM are reversed. I'm sorry for that. So yes, Germans are so algorithm skeptic that even in the STEM disciplines, in the STEM study subjects, we find a super slim majority against a general application of algorithms. But the same finding continues here as well. As soon as we explain it, we see that this changes. So now we have a clear majority in both groups, and the groups get much more similar. But the big difference is that STEM students, and again, also in the figure on the right, the labels are reversed, that STEM students, over 30% of them would even prefer a recruitment process that is only run by algorithms. So where the decisions are only made by algorithms. I think this is a extreme scenario for the moment, and hopefully also for the future. But we see that in the data. So even above 30% say they want algorithms to make the decisions, then 40% say they want a combination between humans and algorithms. So and then less than 30% says they want humans to make the decisions. But that means if you're trying to hire people from a technical background, there's a huge majority that's in favor of algorithms. So I think 29% wants a recruitment process that is only run by humans. And if we look into what's happening in practice, more than 29% of the companies are running on decision processes that are human-centric. And these leads to biases. And especially when we think about what Jan said previously about lots of applications coming from India, about the general shortage of people with a technical background, a shortage of people who are good in IT, computer science tasks, well, then this is a strong signal that these people actually, once you explain it to them and once you tell them that you want to do lower discrimination in your company, you want to lower discrimination in recruitment, they like algorithms. They like being screened by algorithms. They think that this is a good new technology that you could be using. So. And this is the reason why we conducted this research, but because it's ultimately this decision is made by the company how they want to set up their recruitment process, but they should be listening to their applicants. They should be listening to what the applicants want, because I think you should be transparent about a hiring process, and you should be transparent about why you're hiring someone or why you're not hiring someone within the legal limits. Of course, you shouldn't get into legal risks by being too honest, but I think it should be a transparent process, and that means once it's transparent, the acceptance of the applicants matters, because it could have an impact on the number of applicants you get in the first place, or whether someone wants to apply at your company or not. So I think it's a very positive sign that we do find, even in Germany, which is as I said, rather algorithm skeptic country, we find that a majority of students, of graduates, is in favor of algorithms once there's a clear application scenario, and if it's not just applied everywhere, irrespective of whether it makes sense or not, but if it's applied in certain situations to reach certain goals, then there's a clear majority behind it, and I think that's a very positive result. So to sum up, I said all that before. Students are, in general terms, skeptic. They don't want algorithms to be mindlessly applied everywhere, but there's a clear majority in favor of them if the criteria for the application are clear and communicated. And I think that's a good result. The entire study can be found on our website. Unfortunately, it's in German. I think the figures speak for themselves. Maybe we'll upload a translated version at some point. But as I said, this research project is funded by the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia, so we had to do it in German first. I think this presentation gives a very good summary of the results. But if you have questions about the publication, also feel free to get in contact. And I think I'm perfectly on time. I have 1 minute left. Josh, what do you say?
That's pretty good going. All right. Well, thank you very much for that presentation, Philipp. So, yeah, as before, anyone who has any questions, feel free to write them into the chat. So my question first would be, how important should it be for applicants to accept these algorithms in the selection process?
Well, in the first moment, it doesn't matter. So in the first, this is a decision that is made by the company. They probably have experts on HR diagnostic. At least the larger companies tend to have these kind of experts. They can talk to external experts. I think we heard some today that it can also help to improve the recruitment process. And there are lots of arguments for companies to use this technology. It's more efficient, but as I said, it should also be not just more efficient, but lead to better decisions. But then they're good and bad algorithms. But I think for our algorithms, at least, we have very good arguments, and we have very strong studies that show that the predictive power of our algorithms is good. And I think, at least I wish, I want all other suppliers of technology like this, just as suppliers of recruitment tests. We just heard it. Look at peer-reviewed studies. Look at publications. Look at external validity, construct validity. All these numbers. And this is what the companies need to look at in order to set up their recruitment process. But then, what the applicants think is also important. We talk about candidate experience a lot. We talk about employer branding, and these things are all related in a way, right? If you use algorithms in your recruitment process, then depending on the data these algorithms require, you have to communicate it. For example, there are some tools. I doubt them a bit. Or a bit more that, for example, screen video interviews or that analyze voice and then try to derive the personality of the people. By doing that, I think that's, from a theoretical point of view, already hard to do, and I don't see the facts that this is actually working. But there, you have to be transparent about using an algorithm because the applicant has to talk to a computer. So you can't hide that. With the tools we are providing, they screen CVs, so theoretically you don't have to tell the applicants. But why not? What's the harm in it? You're doing this to reach certain goals, and if one of the goals is to hire better people, then this is something you could be able to communicate to your applicants. And if one of the goals is to get rid of discrimination or to lower discrimination, then communicate this. But once you communicate it, it's important to know the acceptance. So I hope the results that are sort of an encouragement for companies to also be transparent, because transparency is one of the aspects where people don't like algorithms so much, which is a bit counterintuitive from a technical perspective, because even if I use an algorithm and in 2 years I want to see why a certain decision was made, I can reproduce that decision. I can have a look at it again. Try to ask your HR staff why they hired someone 2 years ago. You won't be able to replicate it. So theoretically, algorithms should be more transparent, but the perception is that they are not. So one aspect of that is that we're open about using them, that we're open about talking about why we use them, what's the aim of that, and that we as companies that are providing algorithms are also open in explaining how they work and what type of information they use and what type of information they don't use and why. We think about, these are things that we're working on every day, so why not talk about it?
Okay, thank you. Do you find that in terms of that transparency, do algorithms perform better with this human element or without it? So with regards to the combination approach you mentioned.
In terms of reproducibility, just the algorithm is ideal, at least for someone who can read code and understands data and can just look at the version of the algorithms 2 years ago and reproduce everything. I mean, if that's what you mean with transparency, well, then algorithms are better. If transparency means that I can understand the decision, well, then for a lot of people, it's much easier to understand a human and to understand sort of the reasoning and the thought process that a human goes through in order to make these decisions. So in that sense, that it really depends on the perspective. The combination of human and algorithm, I think, has huge advantages. It makes the application process much more human. It gives a human contact point. I think it's really weird to apply somewhere and talk to a computer. I wouldn't want that. I would want to get a real life example of the company I'm going to be working for, about the culture, the spirit. I want a human to talk to. In order to also to answer my questions. I don't want a computer to sort of answer my questions in a way that someone pre-coded or a chatbot. And I mean, these are not the actual people that are working on these solutions. But the combination is also good in avoiding mistakes and in order to get rid of these biases. Because as I said at the beginning, most of the people don't want to discriminate, and these biases result out of a shortage of information. So if the algorithm can provide more information, context information, that should drive down discrimination. So I think this is a good way to do it. And of course, algorithms can go wrong. So it never hurts to have two perspectives on the same CV, on the same application. So in terms of avoiding mistakes, the combinations should be preferable for obvious reasons.
Okay, and a question from Ignacio in the chat. Philip, given the scenario where a potential client is looking for an AI vendor for recruiting, what advice would you provide for them to be sure the engineering the vendor provides is aligned to the client need and free of bias?
The best expert on algorithms, AI, recruitment, whatever, cannot assess an algorithm without getting the data. So my advice is very simple: get the data. Do a test run. You can even do a test run on historic data. If your trust is not large enough to make this go live in your actual hiring process, get past data, get that data analyzed by the algorithm, see whether the opinion of the algorithm matches the, for example, job performance indicators that you have at your company. If the algorithm is able to do that, that would give me a good opinion on external validity, so predictive validity, in the sense that the algorithm can predict important variables that lie in the future. Depending on how much you trust your supplier, don't give them the job performance indicators. If they don't have the job performance indicators, there's nothing they can do to cheat you. And then you have a good impression. And if the goal is not just being more efficient and doing better, making better decisions, but also something like lowering discrimination, then you might want to employ something like our index. It's very easy to calculate. Talk to me if you want to get more information on it. We have a technical description on the website. So the FAIR index is then a good indicator to see whether recruitment decisions are free of discrimination, irrespective of who's making them. So that's maybe also something that you want to maybe calculate such an index, discrimination index, at the beginning, and then you want to calculate it again after you started using an algorithm. And then you want to do that again and again and again over time. So constant monitoring never hurt. And it's very easy to do once you have an automated solution, because then you can also automate the monitoring.
Okay. Is there room for maybe an application with regards to keyword matching? So is it possible to ensure applicants aren't looked over for, say, not using the right keywords? Maybe they're using a synonym of a certain word or something. Would that fall within this model?
Could you give me the context? So what are the keywords important for?
So maybe if somebody on their CV is using maybe not the exact right keywords, and so they get looked over in the selection process. Is that something that could be detected?
Keywords in the CV. I mean, in the CV, it's mostly his description of what you've done in the past, right? So where you went for education, and then there's very little keywords with regards to skills. I think this is something that could happen. So especially if the HR staff is not trained in understanding what the actual, for example, programming languages are and how they are related. It could be that you name something that is very similar, but not the exact keyword they've been looking for, and then you get overlooked. Well, this can also happen with algorithms, but it can also be avoided if you set up the algorithm in the right way. So this really depends on the scenario. So, but normally, recruitment staff that is trained for recruiting tech people, they should know the computer languages that are required, what is close to that, what is comparable, and they should be able to make these kind of calls. An algorithm should also be able to make these kind of calls. I mean, this is from an analytical point of perspective of the model, this is a very simple thing to do when you have multiple CVs. Setting up a clustering like this and seeing whether certain skills are related or not is not rocket science anymore.
Okay, and you mentioned about maybe German people are simply more skeptical than non-Germans to explain some part of this data. In terms of the gender, and maybe this has an obvious answer, or why would you think that the acceptance of algorithms would be particularly high among women in this case?
I gave the source. I'm going to talk to Professor Weitzel in 2 weeks. He just sent me an email this morning. So what he hinted at in his email, this is what he said, is that he thinks that we had a very negative debate about algorithms and data privacy in Germany in the last years. So the public debate on this was very negative, and that he can see that in his data. So he can really see that a couple of years back, the perception among women was higher than it was among men, and the results are not coming back this clear anymore. So it's much closer to each other. As you could also see, if we go back to my gender slide, in the scenario where we explain why we're using it, the difference between men and women is really small. So they once you explain why you're using algorithms, the differences seem to vanish. Apparently, he found, and of course I believe that, he found differences in the past that were hinting towards women being more acceptive of algorithms. There's different factors here. I think one factor is really the past experience or the anticipation of discrimination in the labor market, and this probably makes you accept algorithms more as an objective neutral source. But at the same time, there's also skepticism about technology, about data privacy, all these kind of things, and probably women are also more receptive for these arguments. So this is maybe a reason why it changed. Super broadly speaking, I mean, right? Yes.
Okay, well, unless there are other questions, then I want to thank you for your time, Philip. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for listening. And if there are any questions, feel free to get in touch in the future. I think you're going to be sending out the presentations anyhow.
Yes, I'll be sending out the slides and a link to the video once we've put it together. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Yeah, thank you. Take care. So with that being our last speaker, this brings us to just the conclusion of the day. So we hope that you enjoyed these talks and found them very informative and very useful. I feel like the theme we've really got here is that the future of tech in recruitment, just like in everything else, is coming, and it's here soon, maybe even faster due to the recent crisis and the push for the need for this kind of tech in the first place. Of course, on the other hand, you could say that, as Dave mentioned, many businesses are looking to maybe rely on what they have instead of what they want, so to speak. But nevertheless, it is important to understand the tech and the concepts behind it. And I think what we see here is that there's a great amount of data out there about what there is, and more importantly than that, there's a great need to understand this data. And hopefully you've got some interesting insights from all of our speakers. I want to thank Dave Milner, Max Bloomberg, Dr. Jan Bergerhoff, Dr. Philipp Karl Seegers. I should say Dr. Max Bloomberg if I'm referring to everyone else as a doctor as well, just to be fair. Thank you all so much for your contributions. I hope everybody enjoyed the talks. I'm going to leave the chat open for a few more minutes if you want to provide any final comments. I will be, as I said, sending the slides and the video to everybody via email. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. It would be great to hear from you. And aside from that, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time. Take care.